All right, so the 10th game of the year is almost here. Northwestern is back on the road, this time against Minnesota. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Northwestern, your daily podcast on the Northwestern Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. This is Locked On Northwestern, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Carter Bird, and thank you for making Locked On Northwestern your first listen every day. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun to do this show this year, and we're available wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you can find us. We're also on YouTube. Just search Locked On Northwestern, and you can find us wherever you're listening. Make sure you turn on those notifications. Make sure that you subscribe. You don't want to miss an episode. Make sure you leave a comment and give us some feedback as we try to make this show better as we go along. Today's episode is also brought to you by Sling TV. Sling has something for everyone, especially when it comes to college football coverage, with a massive lineup of games across the ACC, Big Ten, Pac 12, and SEC. I can always catch the games I want on Sling, and now you can too. Check out Sling TV now to see the massive lineup of games they have all season long. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try it today. All right, so we obviously know that Northwestern things have not exactly gone according to plan this year. Final stretch of the year here, 3 games to go. What can this team do to salvage it? I do believe that there still is technically a scenario where they can win the Big Ten West, but this weekend they take on Minnesota, and this is, if you want to keep the hope alive for winning the Big Ten West, I think they have to win. That is the first thing, obviously. Well, Minnesota, as you know, head coach PJ Fleck, he's 71 of 48 in his coaching career, 41 and 26 in his tenure at Minnesota. He is 24 and 25 in Big Ten play in his time there. He's been to 6 career bowl games, 3 at Minnesota. He's 4-2 in bowl games, 3-0 at Minnesota though. This year, Minnesota is 6-3, 3-3 in conference play. They're a lot better at home, but they started 4-0 with wins with not exactly the most impressive list of wins over New Mexico State, Western Illinois, Colorado, and Michigan State. In those 4 games, they outscored their opponents 183 to 34. Yeah, so it was that kind of the start of the season, kind of similar to what Michigan was doing on the other side of the conference. Well, thanks to some injuries and obviously an elevation of the caliber of opponent they were playing on a weekly basis. Followed that 4-0 start with 3 consecutive losses to Purdue, Illinois, and Penn State. They were outscored in those games 91 to 41. So the script kind of got flipped on them for those 3 games. They've managed to get kind of back healthy here. They bounced back with back-to-back wins over Rutgers and Nebraska. They were trailing in that Nebraska game for a while, and came back and won that one 20-13 last week. They are 4-1 at home and 2-2 on the road. Obviously, this game for them is at home. Northwestern's on the road at Minnesota, so not a great stat for Northwestern's favor there. This team is averaging 468 yards of offense at home and just 332 on the road. So, it's granted, some of those home games were against really bad teams. Makes sense. They're also only averaging 334 yards of offense in Big Ten play. Let's take a look at the offense. On offense, they're averaging 407.6 yards per game. That is good for 59th in America. They're averaging 30.6 points per game, tied for 54th. 195.7 passing yards per game, 106th in the country, but 211.9 rushing yards, which is, we're going to talk about that run game because that run game is very, very good. That is good for 16th in the country. They convert 56.6 of their third downs, which astonishingly, and this kind of blew my mind, I was not expecting them to be that good on third down when I dove deep into it. They lead the country in third down conversion percentage. Keep that in mind because we're going to talk about the defense in a second. And it's a fascinating, really bizarre team, this Minnesota team this year. They convert 62.5% of their fourth downs. Tied for 25th in the country. They've lost 10 turnovers this year, 2 fumbles, 8 interceptions. That's not bad. It's tied for 25th in the country. And then they have a completion percentage of 61.5%, kind of middle of the pack in the country, 64th. They've allowed 10 sacks, 1.11 per game, which is top 20 in America. And then look, when you look at this offense, the challenge for this Northwestern defense is who starts at quarterback. Tanner Morgan's been banged up the back half of this year. They have not announced to this point at the time of recording this, they have not announced who the quarterback is going to be on Saturday. Tanner Morgan, obviously, been banged up here recently. He's the veteran multi-year starter, been around forever. I mean, might as well be getting his AARP card. He's 103 of 153 this year for a 67.3% completion percentage, 1,324 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, about 8.7 yards per attempt, and has a passer rating of 148.6. On the ground, he is capable of using his legs, doesn't do it a ton. 32 rushes, 63 yards, but does have 4 rushing touchdowns this year. Pretty decent number for a guy who's probably more of a pocket passer. If he cannot go, they will go to Ethan, and stick with me here. This is going to be a name that tomorrow when we do our crossover with the Minnesota Locked On show, I will get some clarification on this last name, but Kaliakmanis, he's a dual threat guy, 20 of 45, 44.4% completion percentage, 396 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, just 6.2 yards per attempt, and 112.4 passer rating. But he does have 17 rushes for 77 yards and a touchdown. Very much a much bigger threat with his legs than Tanner Morgan is. And I think that if he starts this game, that'll be indicative. You'll see that on the field for sure. At running back, this is the star of the offense, and that's Muhammad Ibrahim. He's an absolute stud, one of the best backs in the country. 202 rushes this season, 1,083 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5.4 yards per attempt. Also has 6 catches on the year for 43 yards. Look, he's an all Big Ten caliber back who came back from injury this year and has produced at the highest level in the country. I mean, over 4,000 yards in his career. He's been over 100 yards in every single game this year. He went over for 202 yards against Colorado. He has 5 multi-TD games this year, 2 games with 3 touchdowns as well. Really, really, he is kind of like Evan Hull is for Northwestern. he makes the engine go on offense for Minnesota. It's going to be a significant challenge for Northwestern's defense. But then again, he did just put forth a pretty decent performance against a good offense that has some talented backs in Ohio State this past week. Granted, weather aided and all that, I know. But let's look at the pass catchers next. Well, their number one guy, Chris Ottman-Bell, he's out for the year. He's banged up. I think he is actually coming back next year, if I did read that correctly. But he will not be playing in this one. That's hampered the passing game kind of all year long. Before his injury, he had 11 receptions, 214 yards, and a touchdown. Well, since then, they've had to have some guys step up, and they've got 3 guys with 300-plus passing yards on the season. Mike Brown-Stevens, 22 receptions, 338 yards, but no touchdowns to this point in the year. Next, you have Brevin Spann-Ford, 28 receptions, 358 yards, 2 touchdowns. The guy who's caught the most balls, has the most yards, and is tied for the most touchdowns. So he's going to be somebody to keep an eye on. Daniel Jackson, 23 receptions, 321 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then finally, Dylan Wright, 9 receptions, 166 yards, and a touchdown. Those are your kind of 4 guys to keep an eye on. The 3, obviously, with 300-plus yards are going to be the ones to keep the closest, pay the closest attention to. It's going to be fascinating to see what this offense is like. We will talk more about it here at the end of today's show. But in a second, we're going to take a look at this defense. This defense, it's interesting. It very, very is. Some stats are awesome. Some stats, not so much. What are we going to see on Saturday? We're going to find out in just a second. But first, let's talk about our friends at Simply Safe. The numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen Simply Safe home security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because, look, I use Simply Safe at my home, and they protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. With 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or even if you can't be reached. Simply Safe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and outside your home. Smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real. And even hazard sensors that instantly detect hazards like fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Also, thank you for making Locked On Northwestern your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. All right, time to talk about this defense for Minnesota. So far this year, they're allowing 273.6 yards per game, 7th in the country. So, interesting stat there. 14.22 points per game, 4th in the country. So right off the bat, you're kind of thinking, okay, 3rd straight top 10 defense for Northwestern to see in a row. How do they handle it? some of the stats back that up, and then we're going to get to some here in a second that are going to really puzzle you. But they allow 162.9 passing yards per game, fourth in the country, 110.7 rushing yards per game, 18th, top 20 there. And then remember, on offense, they are the number one third down offense at converting first downs. Well, on defense, they allow 25.5% third down conversion rate. That is good for second in the country. So it's clear that PJ Fleck and his team really do focus on third downs and making sure that they can convert those on offense and get off the field on defense. But they do allow 66.7% of fourth downs, which is tied for 110th. So right there, like, that's the first sign that some of these stats are very, very odd. They're 8th in team pass efficiency defense. They are really bad in the red zone, and that is shocking with all these other stats. They allow 94.1% of red zone trips to end in points, tied for 127th in the country. They allow touchdowns on 47.1% of those drives. They have 14 turnovers gained on the year, 4 of those being fumbles, 10 of those being interceptions. That's tied for 49th in the country. They don't get a lot of sacks. They only have 14 sacks so far this year, good for 1.56 per game, tied for 106th in the country. They also allow 30. They have not allowed. They have gotten 36 tackles for loss, good for 4 tackles for loss per game. That's not good. That is tied for 125th in the country. It's puzzling to me that this team is so good on third down and is so good at suppressing opposing offenses, but they don't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and they don't create a lot of negative plays. That's, if nothing else, that's good for Northwestern, because as long as you play a clean football game, you won't be going backwards that often in this game, especially with an offensive line that is a strength of the offense. Maybe you can stay ahead of the chain some. Maybe you can kind of get something going. Maybe you can jump on this Minnesota team like you did Ohio State last week. Their leading tackler is linebacker Mariano Sori-Marin. He's a fifth-year senior, 66 tackles this year, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 2 passes defended. Their tackle for loss leaders, you got Sori-Marin, and then you have defensive end Danny Strigau. They both have 4.5 tackles for loss. Strigau has 17 tackles this year, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 1 interception, and 1 pass defended. Cody Lindenberg is not far behind in tackles for loss, 39 tackles this year, 4 of those going for a loss, 1 sack and 2 passes defended. Sack leader is Strigau. And then look, I mean, when you look at the interceptions on this team, there's 4 guys who have multiple interceptions and have shown an ability to go and get the football. But the leader of the group is the defensive back Tyler Nubin. He has 42 tackles this year, 2 tackles for a loss, 3 interceptions, 2 passes defended, and a forced fumble. This, when you look at the numbers, it's so fascinating what this defense is, because they do not force those negative plays that you're used to seeing out of a top 10 caliber defense. So I'm fascinated. Granted, and I wonder how much of the numbers are aided by the early season run of not very good offenses they played in a row. They obviously got Rutgers here a few weeks ago. Held them to a 31-0 rout. Rutgers, not exactly a traditional powerhouse when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. I'm curious to see if Northwestern with Evan Hull, especially coming off last week, if they can get something going on the ground, if they can have another one of those performances where Evan Hull kind of carries them. I'm going to have an eye on that against this defense. But we're going to give our final thoughts here in a second and kind of wrap this whole thing up. But first, can we pause the pod for a second? Great, because look, you've got to try Built Bar's new reimagined flavors, like the cookie dough topper, the coconut brownie bar, and the coconut brownie topper. First off, look, for anyone who hasn't tried Built Bars before, they're literally the best tasting protein bars ever built. They just sent me a box a little while ago, and I absolutely love them. Very delicious and just what I need for a quick snack on the go. They're revolutionizing nutrition as we know it with 100% real chocolate, 17 grams of protein, and shockingly low sugar and calories. Just 130 calories. Just sink your teeth into that first bite and it'll change your life forever. Look, I mean, which flavor is my favorite? I don't know. I can't even really tell you. They're all so good. There's so many different flavors, but you can order a mixed box and try all 5 flavors for yourself. Built. You gotta try this. All right. Let's also give a shout out to you for listening to Locked On Northwestern. We thank you for making Locked On Northwestern your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so final takeaways after looking at this Minnesota team. Look, they've been pretty up and down. The highs are really, really high. They seem to really beat up and kill teams that they are better than. That's kind of been their MO all year. You saw it at the beginning of the year. You kind of saw it the past couple weeks. You definitely saw it against Rutgers. Didn't quite see it as much against Nebraska. Nebraska gave them some trouble. But I think, look, this game comes down to me, who starts at quarterback for Minnesota? Because you have Ethan Kaliakmanis, still working on that last name. If he's starting, he's not had a lot of success on the offensive side of the ball. It really has not been a pretty kind of performance by him to this point in the year. He's turned the ball over a lot, does not complete a high percentage of his passes, just 44%. If it's Tanner Morgan and he's ready to go and he's healthy, I think that this thing it's going to be tough for Northwestern's defense to contain Ibrahim and Tanner Morgan. I think it can go south fairly quickly. But if Tanner Morgan is hindered in any way, if Kaliakmanis is not, if he's starting the game, if this is his game start to finish, I think Northwestern can hang in there. I think they absolutely can on the defensive side of the ball. The offense, and we say this every single week, it feels like, you have to get Evan Hull going. You have to. Evan Hull, Cam Porter, Andrew Clare, the run game has to get rolling because that's Northwestern's bread and butter. When they are clicking on all cylinders on offense, it is because they can run the football. That's going to be what I have my eye on. That's going to be where I think this game can. I think that there's a scenario with the banged up nature of Minnesota. Northwestern can go on the road in this game and shock the world here and pull their second win of the year, and maybe keep those Big Ten West championship hopes alive. It's something that I know is maybe not the most likely thing ever, but I certainly believe Northwestern has the ability, just as I've said all year long about the Big Ten West. I think the worst team in the Big Ten West, any given Saturday, is capable of beating the best team in the Big Ten West. It's that kind of a division this year. And I think this weekend, Northwestern might just go get it done, especially if they play with that same energy, that same effort, that same fight that we saw against the number 2 team in the country last week against Ohio State, a team that I still think might win the national championship. That's probably going to do it for today's episode. Appreciate you listening. Thank you for listening to Locked On Northwestern and making us your first listen every day for anything and everything Northwestern. We really appreciate it. We're available wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. We're also on YouTube. Just search Locked On Northwestern. You can find us wherever you're listening. Make sure you like, you subscribe. Make sure you turn on those notifications. Turned into a YouTuber there for a second, saying make sure you like and subscribe. The bells somewhere for notifications. But yeah, don't miss an episode. I mean, we're going to continue to talk about this game. Tomorrow we have our crossover episode with the Locked On Minnesota channel. Looking forward to that. And yeah, I appreciate you listening. I'm your host, Carter Bird. You can follow me on social media at CarterBird13. And I will see you all next time.